believe it or not, inbreeding used to be considered a good thing. You might have seen or heard at some point in your life, because it was kind of common, but royal families like to maintain purity. And by purity, they mean inbreeding. There was this whole concept that royals had royal blood, and that's what made them better than people, and they were appointed by God or something. It was a whole thing, and that's why royalty's kind of cringe, especially when you look back through history and you realize that all royalty is pretty much inbred. You kind of don't respect the concept of royalty at all. But before we talk about all those literal inbreds, what is the problem with inbreeding besides the obvious weird part? The biggest problem with inbreeding is recessive gene pairs. You have two genes, a dominant and recessive. When you have a child, the mother and the father's genes combine, and that's what makes the kid's genes. And if somebody has a kid with someone closely related to them, since those parents are closely related, if they have recessive traits that are bad, the kid from those parents is way more likely to inherit those recessive traits. So let's say, for example, you have a dormant recessive trait in your family that makes you infertile. If you have two people that are related to each other and they both have this trait, the next child is way more likely to have this trait because the same two recessive genes at the same time make it a shown symptom. If it's only one of them, it'll just stay dormant. But if you add the second one, oh no, we hit disease. Like, that's why King Charles II looks like this. You think this was normal? It wasn't. So King Charles II is the son of King Philip and Mariana of Austria, and he was a part of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. And King Charles II is where that dynasty ended, because after 16 generations of inbreeding and 3,000 descendants later, we have King Charles, who is a mess. He got sick all the time, presumably because he's inbred, and he was physically deformed, as you can see, and everyone seems to think that he was a dunce. Like, everyone around him has said he is not mentally capable and he's really dumb. His advisors, though, said he was capable, but I also doubt that because there's a lot of people saying he wasn't. And the thing is the Spanish Habsburg family was extremely powerful. They controlled the Netherlands, Belgium, and some parts of Germany. And during King Charles II's rule, people generally thought he wasn't good at his job. He was not a revered king, and to make his legacy even worse, during this period, he was trying to have a kid to have an heir pretty desperately, and it wasn't happening. And while he was trying to get an heir, he also was sick. Like, deathly ill. And in the end, there was too much pressure, so King Charles II had to step down because he couldn't have kids, he couldn't lead the country, and he was extremely ill with what we now assume is appendicitis, which in the modern day would have been relatively easy to treat. A lot of deaths in general in this time period are caused by a lot of medical conditions that we consider mundane now. And to add insult to injury, National Geographic made a report in 2009 where they state they think inbreeding was the sole cause of their dynasty ending, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. If these royal families just had kids with other people, they might still be around. Like, actually, that is like a really real possibility because a lot of problems in Europe were because of inbreeding. But the report confirms the 16 generations of inbreeding and the total of 3,000 people in the family tree. And they think King Charles II got sick all the time because he inherited two recessive genetic disorders that he probably wouldn't have gotten if he wasn't inbred, because inbreeding made the recessive traits almost a guarantee. And not too long after he stepped down, King Charles II died at 38. And they did an autopsy on his body, and honestly, I don't know what to think about this because this is what they said. His heart was the size of a peppercorn. His lungs corroded, his intestines rotted and gangrenous, he had a single testicle, black as coal, and his head was full of water. I don't know what to make of that, because most certainly, most of that was not true. We probably won't know what he was actually like at any point, because there's no way that this is true. Whoever wrote the records did not like this guy. And last thing about the Habsburg family, they all had these big chins, and it was called the Habsburg chin. So if you see a guy in history who looks like that, probably related. There's a high chance. And next up in the list of inbreeding, we have Ireland. And Ireland, you're safe, because there's no king here. At least not that I'm talking about. There's probably an inbred king somewhere down the line. It was really common back then, but researchers found a man who lived 5,000 years ago, born from incest among a ruling social elite. It probably wasn't a king because it was so long ago, but they're pretty sure he was inbred because his genome is identical, and they're usually different. As we discussed with parents, passing their genes on to the kid, you get one from each parent, and if the parents are related, they look identical. So yeah, probably inbred. And he was buried at one of the most prestigious burial sites in Europe. So he was definitely something. We don't know what, because it was so long ago. But yeah, people were inbreeding even 5,000 years ago. And next up, we have Queen Victoria, who was inbred. The current king, I'm pretty sure, is also inbred. I think the entire royal family is inbred for the most part. I could be wrong on that one, but kind of don't care. But Queen Victoria was the daughter of Prince Edward and Princess Victoria. And she was inbred, but luckily, she didn't have any complications from it. But, unfortunately, her son did, and her son died at 30 from hemophilia. And hemophilia is a condition where your blood doesn't clot properly. So if you get like a cut, for example, you know how you get like a scab? Basically, with hemophilia, that doesn't happen, so a paper cut could make you bleed out. So you can see why this would be a really bad disease to have, especially, in 1850. And hemophilia was so common among the royals in the UK that at one point it was considered the royal disease. So yeah, being an inbred royal in Europe was normal. And Queen Victoria died in 1901, seemingly from natural causes. It is unlikely she died from anything related to being inbred. Ferdinand the First, the Emperor of Austria, was also inbred. He was the son of Francis II and Maria Theresa. And apparently Ferdinand had a lot of inbred problems. He was was described as cognitively disabled. He also constantly had seizures throughout his life, and you might have noticed he also has a really big head, like Megamind brain. It's unclear if his head looks like that because of being inbred or a different condition entirely. One of the theories was that his head just had too much fluid in it, and with modern medical technology they could have diagnosed that, but he lived in the 1800s. Realistically though, Ferdinand was probably not super stupid. The problem was apparently he had like 20 seizures a day, which means he really couldn't do his job of like being the emperor. And the reason people think he was actually smart and people just thought he was dumb because he always had seizures was he kept a very well-written journal. So yeah, probably not a dunce, but he still couldn't do his job because, you know, the seizures. Having 20 seizures a day makes doing your job kinda hard. I'm not saying this guy shouldn't have had a decent life or something. I'm just saying putting that guy in charge of the country, kinda crazy. But even though Ferdinand was inbred and suffered complications from it and had seizures all the time, he lived till 82, which is honestly crazy. This guy was having seizures all the time, and he still lived to 82 in the year 1875. And for our next inbred, we have King Tut. Charles II and King Tut are arguably the two most famous people in this video, especially King Tut as of recent, because there's this 3D recreation of what he looked like, and it wasn't pretty, quite literally. But there's a really interesting story with King Tut. So King Tut only had about a 9-year reign, and the reason for that is because he only lived to 19. But despite that, he is one of the most famous pharaohs to ever exist. And why is that? Well, it turns out, if you want to be remembered in history, you have to be high up in society, but not too high up, because if you're too high up, people are gonna rob your grave. So yeah, it turns out King Tut's tomb was one of the only ones not robbed. That is why this king is so famous. They did nothing remarkable that we know of. They were just a deathly ill young man that died young. That's King Tut's legacy. But a couple things we discovered in his tomb that gave us a good hint as to what happened with him. They found more than 100 walking sticks, or in modern terms, over 100 canes. Yeah, he had a really bad limp. They also found a bunch of pharmacies, which really is just old medical stuff. So like medicinal fruits, seeds, leaves, stuff like that. But after they extracted some of King Tut's DNA, the researchers were able to name several previously unknown mummies, including King Tut's parents, which happened to be siblings. Yeah, so King Tut is the son of sibling parents. And in his tomb, they also found 2 mummified fetuses, of which King Tut is the father of, and the mother is at least his half-sister. So yeah, it was not just Europe doing inbreeding, but they think King Tut died of a really bad case of malaria. They said it was a case of malaria that we wouldn't even be able to treat really well today. So even if King Tut was in the modern world, he probably still would have died. And they think a leg fracture was what led to his life-threatening condition. And that sounds like he didn't die because he was inbred, but he actually did because the leg fracture was caused by his bone necrosis, which is a disorder that results in a poor blood supply, which means your bones are weak and milk will not save you, and this is a genetic disorder. So yeah, inbreeding also killed Egypt. And now we turn back to the UK to look at a clan of inbreeding cannibals. Now, this story is contentious. A lot of people think this is just legend, and some people think this is real. So you can listen and judge for yourself if it's real or not. The Bean clan is thought to have lived in a remote coastal cave in the UK. They think there was about 40 members of the cannibal clan, and they supposedly had over 1,000 victims over 25 years. Those 40 members were all inbred family members of Sawney Bean. Supposedly Bean had 8 sons and 6 daughters, and then those children had 14 granddaughters and 18 grandsons for Sawney Bean. Supposedly. And the Sawney Bean clan over the course of 25 years would just rob people and eat them. That's pretty much all they did. And then eventually King James IV got really tired of it and organized a search party of 400 men and several bloodhounds. They then looked for the cave, found the cave, and then supposedly in the cave, along with the 40 members of Sawney Bean clan, they were surrounded by dismembered corpses. They then arrested Sawney Bean and the rest of the clan and were executed without trial, which definitely makes sense for the time period. But that has been the video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider sharing with a friend or something, and please like and subscribe down below, and click the answer sign, check out more of my content, and have a good one.